So welcome. How many of you were here last year and were part of my presentation that I did last year? Anybody? No? Okay. Well then, I'm going to do a little bit of recap. They give me 45 minutes. I'm told I have 15 minutes to give you information, 15 minutes to do an activity together with everybody, and 15 minutes for question and answers. Now, I'm used to speaking for 2.5 hours at a time, so we're going to jump through some stuff. However, if you have interest in knowing more information, there are brochures on the chairs that have our website, and there's also a sign-up sheet on the table in the back that if you want to know more information or have questions or other things, you can put your information down there, and I will try to get in touch with you. Sound good? Okay, so we're here to talk about mental health. Mental health, I'm going to describe that in a few things, but today we're going to learn the difference between crisis, trauma, religious trauma, and mental illness. We're going to recap the trauma effects of brain functions, which is pretty much what I spoke about last year. We're going to identify areas of congregant experiences that are requiring clinical intervention. We're going to discuss clinical consultation, when to refer to the outside resources, vetting community resources, and then letting you know about our practice in Salem, Oregon, and what we have to offer you after the conference. Houses of faith, as we are here and a part of, were created to embrace all comers. We all talk about wanting to do outreach and be there for the community. And what we don't think about when we're wanting to reach out is what that community brings inside to our pews. Many times you hear people say that the church is like a hospital. But yet once you get inside, then everyone kind of has their wall up or their mask on, and you don't see the real thing that's going on inside. And so what our churches really are is a place where there's broken and disturbed people on the fringes of society, especially today. And I think culture has been brought up last night and today as far as culture in the church, and that is something we're going to discuss. Welcome. Any of you guys in my session last year? Okay. All right. Yeah, you were? Okay. All right. Why not? Last year, our theme was when trauma comes to church. And just to do some quick recap, as I said, I don't have a lot of time to give to you today. But in the beginning, God created. He created man. And when he created us, I think of this little picture in my head where God is saying to Jesus, now hold still. I need to see how your brain is all wired up because we got to get this right for the people. And when the brain is first created, the first things that are created are the basic needs and safety are the areas of the brain that kind of is the base of everything else that functions afterward and grows. And so when God also created the brain, he knew we were going to have an adversary. And we all know that our fight is in the brain. And we are to renew our mind daily. And so I'm sure many of you have heard the fight, flight, or freeze concept. And so the word even tells us that in Ephesians 6 that we are to fight against spiritual wickedness in high places, and that we are to renew our mind. The word also tells us that we are to rest in him. And that to me is when we're just being still. And then the word also tells us to flee, to run from temptation. And so those are the things that God created our brain at the very beginning to help us to function. The power of the brain is so incredible that it blows my mind even today after going through a doctorate and just having our own practice. We currently are doing something called brain paint with neurofeedback and just learning how the brain When it's growing in the womb, you have this back part, which is the fight, flight, or freeze, the place of survival. It's all about survival and about safety. And as the brain grows, you have radio frequencies that have pathways that they grow up through the brain to get to the right side and to the left side, which has to do with memory and emotions and speech and perception. And then it grows to what's called the prefrontal cortex. And the prefrontal cortex is where we have problem solving and all the executive functionings of remembering basically what to do. One of the things that we call muscle memory. Once you do something so long, it just kind of happens. When someone is traumatized, I think of these radio frequencies that are coming up through the pathways as guitar strings. And if you hit that guitar string wrong, what's going to happen? It's going to ping, and it's going to come out of the place that it was meant to be in. And when that happens in our brain, we create new ways of thinking that are usually maladaptive. In other words, they're not correct. And so our perception tells us that every time you hear a certain noise, that something bad is going to happen if that's part of your trauma history. And so we need to help ourselves and the people in our congregation, about learning how to my brain just left me. How to heal that part of the brain. And so that's one of the things we talk about. Behind the mask, we've talked about a little bit of all of us put on a mask. And what is it that we're trying to hide? And what is it that we don't want other people to see? And when we're in ministry, whenever we look at someone, what we see usually is not the real person. They're behind a mask. And that brings us to what is called trauma on the pews. The nature behind trauma is a spiritual battle. To me, as I was going through school and I was looking at the term trauma, and I went to Liberty University, so we had to compare everything to scripture, I found that as I was studying the brain and different things, that I could replace, hear me out, I could replace the word sin with trauma. All sin causes trauma because it takes us out of a relationship that we were meant to be in with other people and with God. Lack of healing from a traumatized brain is a crisis. So, as I was saying, when the brain is building and growing, it needs to come to the prefrontal cortex. And if someone is experiencing trauma or complex trauma, which means numerous kinds of trauma continually in their life, their brain does not continue to grow to get to this first part of the brain called the prefrontal cortex. In this area of the prefrontal cortex is where we understand love, trust, and our need for a savior. And if we cannot help people to heal and build that prefrontal part of their cortex, they're going to have a hard time understanding their need for a savior. And to me and to us, that is a crisis because we are here to bring people to Christ. It's all about safety and survival. One of the things that I teach many of my client families, especially when I work a lot with the foster and adoptive system, is to replace the word love with safety. We have many people who have been hurt, and they have been hurt by the person who has loved them. So as the church, when we want to love, we want to show Christ's love, but when we speak love, well, I love you, I'm going to help you. In their mind, they're not able to receive it as love. They don't see it as love. They see it as, here's another person who might hurt me. And so whatever we do, it has to be about safety. And I'll get into that a little bit more later. And trauma affects everyone. If you have someone who is traumatized in your church, in your congregation, it affects you whether you understand it or not, because it ripples through. And trauma people find trauma people. And those trauma people then, in their maladaptive belief systems, create more trauma within the congregation. Oops, sorry, went too fast. Some statistics. 1 in 5 American adults has experienced trauma or its effects in the past decade. So in the past 10 years, at least 5 of you in here have experienced some severe trauma, according to statistics. 2 in every 5 congregants have experienced some form of trauma. So if you have a congregation of 200-300 people, well, do the math, and you've got quite a number of people sitting in your congregation that are experiencing trauma today. 23% of pastors have personally struggled with mental illness, but only 49% of them never speak to their congregation about mental illness. The church has become a haven for sexual predators. If you did not know that, come talk to me later, because you need to be aware that sexual predators like to weave themselves into the church, and they're the people who are usually the kindest, the nicest, want to do things for you and your children, and you find out later that their intention was more than what you expected. Unfortunately, church leadership can cause harm. In our exuberance to love, when we do not understand trauma and how it affects the brain, we actually then in turn cause harm to the people who are traumatized in our church and who are hurting. One of the most dangerous hours, this was very interesting to me, this was in a big newspaper. One of the most dangerous hours in America is now 11 o'clock on a Sunday morning. Do I need to explain that one? It could be, but all the shootings and all the violence that's coming into the church because of the people sitting on the pews. Yeah. The church has become a frontline for the nation's social ills. He just talked about that in the last session. I'm sorry? Come to us. Yes. Yeah. So I've been to a church one time where the pastor used to say, welcome, we'd like to know who you are, but don't worry, we will never come to your house. And I always was like, Pastor Steve, why would you tell people that? Because, sorry, this is, I need Ladina. Ladina's my person. What people want really, what they have wanted and needed is action. More action, meaningful action in response to the crisis and to their plight. Without a formal external social support recognition, us, the church, many will suffer alone. And so we need to be available. I'm not saying just go knock on everybody's door and say, here I am. There's some social graces to that. But to have a pastor stand up and say, don't worry, we will never come to your house, just crushed me. I'm sorry, I keep hitting the microphone. Because we are to be there for the people. It's presence that helps, just our presence. The other thing that has been spoken about in the last 2 sessions was culture. How culture affects the church. Contemporary issues in America, everything that is happening in the culture spills over into the church. We're now talking about concealed weapons, which sound safe enough, but in the wrong hands is not safe. We're talking about domestic disputes that turn violent and pull in people from the congregation. We're talking about mental illness and political agendas, whether it's the LGBTQ, ABCDEFG, or the Black Lives Matter, whatever. Those things are all coming into the church, and all those things bring with them a level of trauma. All right, so defining crisis and trauma. Crisis is defined as the perception of a critical incident that produces subjective distress. Subjective is what we internalize personally, not necessarily what the whole group sees. It causes the person the inability to cope, to function at their normal levels of performance. In simpler terms, it's a cause or a turning point, a crucial time in a person's life when there is an internal reaction to an external hazard. Crisis is a result of a root symptom of loss and has special significance for the individual. So loss is a root thing. Loss of death, a loss of not being able to have children, a loss of a parent, a loss of a relationship. Those things and how they are handled cause trauma. Trauma involves intense fear. It causes helplessness, a loss of control, and a threat of annihilation. In other words, my life is no longer going to continue. I need to fight to make it and to stay living. Such fear, helplessness, and threat to life silences a person, alienates them, and renders them powerless and speechless. So when we feel, or people that we're working with feel like they are not heard, they go silent. They shut down. The mask gets a couple extra coats of paint, and they feel alone. Excuse me. Things that happen that are traumatic often are unspeakable. Things that have happened to us. Words are inadequate to communicate what has happened. When you have a child that has been traumatized pre-speech, then they have even a harder time healing because they have no words and no definition to put to what has happened to them. In order to heal, one must learn to speak about the unspeakable. The question is for us in the church, can we handle hearing that unspeakable? Trauma isolates, so therefore the indescribable must be described in the context of relationship if healing is ever to occur. So trauma happens with a breakdown of some form of relationship. In order for a person to heal, they need to be in a safe, healing, reciprocal. If you don't know what reciprocal is, it's when two people are giving back and forth equally relationship. Without that, without feeling safe in a relationship, a person will not heal. And their brain will continue to go into more maladaptive belief systems. They will take on more beliefs of society. They will take on more lies that the enemy is throwing at them, that they're worthless, they mean nothing, they have no reason for living. And if healing does not occur, the individual is crushed and will remain silent, disconnected, and helpless. So if you can think probably of some people in your life who seem to be disconnected, seem to be helpless, and don't have much to say, I would gather that they're very traumatized. Now there is the occasion, and this can tend to be those who have gone a little further into mental illness, where they're not silent and they're throwing everything out at you, anyone who will listen. And those are things to watch out for as far as getting some extra help. Defining religious trauma. We have heard about religious trauma for decades, longer than some of you have been alive. But the one thing that we don't want to admit is that we cause trauma in the church. But we do. Religious trauma results from an event, a series of events, relationships, or circumstances within or connected to religious beliefs, practices, or structures that is experienced by an individual as overwhelming or disruptive and has lasting adverse effects on a person's physical, mental, social, emotional, and spiritual well-being. And one thing about trauma, again, it's about our perspective. So we could be speaking truth to someone, but if their perspective is not correct, they're not going to hear what we're truly saying to them. They're not going to hear the heart, our heart of wanting to give and love and care for them. And so if you find that you are working with someone whose perspective is just really off and cannot hear you, then that is another time that you would want to probably look at getting some consulting with someone else and figure out some ways to be able to reach those people. Yes.
If you live in the DFW area, that particular one is in the headlines weekly. It's a big case. It made it national.
Wow. Of church trauma. Yeah. And yes, ma'am.
I'll say finish first, sorry.
Are you finished, sir? Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Would you say that is what is popularly referred to as church hurt?
Yes, correct. Yeah. Yeah. And so there's something else I thought about that I was going to mention. An interesting fact that I learned years ago is that for every 10 years of dysfunction, it takes 1 year of intense therapy and treatment. So if you have someone coming into the church, and it is not uncommon for things to finally start coming out at age 50, 60, 70, 80, of people who have been holding hurt for so long, it's going to take years to be very specific in how we work with that person and that individual. And the sooner we can get to someone and help them process, the easier it's going to be to help bring healing to that person. Mental illness are health conditions involving changes in the emotion, thinking, or behavior. Mental illness can be associated with distress and or problems functioning in social, work, or family. That was mine. Activities. So again, someone who has gotten to the point of mental illness that probably needs clinical care in addition to what you bring with the Holy Spirit is you're going to see that their behaviors, their thinking, their emotions are all over the place. And they need to learn to be regulated before dealing with any trauma. So one of the main things as a clinician in our center is we want to help the brain to heal, to be able to not be so reactive when we discuss trauma to them. If you bring someone into your office that's still very traumatized and has not learned how to self-regulate their emotions and their body, that is when a lot of extra harm can come in. And it's going to cause the person to become more self-destructive, mentally, emotionally, and or physically. Half of all mental illness starts at age 14. Youth groups, pay attention to youth groups, yes.
Can you go back and can you define, you said self-regulating emotions?
Yes.
Can you define that?
Yes. So a person who is healthy-minded can have a better understanding and can regulate their emotions. So if you would see something happen here that upsets you, chances are you're going to be able to maintain your emotions and work through it and not lose it. Someone who is not, yeah, yeah, yep, hollering, crying, any other outward behaviors, yeah. So someone who cannot regulate their emotions, you're going to see it in the store, you're going to see it at church. The child who totally loses it, has those meltdowns and stuff. There's something more going on than just poor parenting. And so that's one of the things that I know, even as when I was a young parent, wondering what people were going to think about my children. My children are all foster and adopted. And it was not uncommon to leave baskets full of groceries in the store as I'm walking out with my children. And people, making comments, oh, she needs to control her kids. She needs to. Now, if you've got that kind of situation going on in your church, there's more to it. And need to search and find out what's going on. And there are several things. There's organic issues with the brain, which would be your ADHD, your autism, fetal alcohol syndrome. So if you have someone who's coming into the church as a Christian now, but before becoming a Christian, while they were pregnant, was drinking alcohol, or you have foster and adoptive children coming into your church, these children are going to have a harder time regulating their emotions. And you're going to see that exhibited. And when those emotions show, it's because they do not feel safe. So when you see anybody acting out, it's because in the moment they don't feel safe. And the first line of defense is to help bring them to the moment to see that they're safe. 1 in 20 adults has a serious mental illness. 3/4 of all mental illness begins by age 24. So working in my field, mostly with foster and adoptive children, and if you have those in your congregation or working with that, children by the time they reach 14, the cognitive and growth area developmentally is when youth try to figure out who they are, where they came from, where they're going, and how they're going to get there. If you add foster or adopted onto that, then those questions are heightened. And these children are going to be much more explosive, not just dysregulated, explosive. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I just wanted to go back to the emotion. I am a therapist.
Okay.
But, I work with a lot of addiction and things. I just wanted to mention the opposite side of what you're saying, being overly expression, I feel, is people stuffing, and now they're addicted to something. And the church, I think, historically has believed, to not have emotions.
Right.
And one of the fruits of the Spirit is love, joy, peace.
Peace. Mm-hmm.
There's a healthy level of expression.
Right. Yeah.
Jesus wept.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that emotions aren't bad.
Right. And I'm sorry if I communicated that. Yeah. I was trying to communicate that if someone can't handle different things. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that can cause mental illness, cause people to stuff.
Yeah. So did you guys hear what she was saying? So she basically was saying that emotions are not bad. And that in the church, a lot of time people will stuff their emotions, and stuffing the emotions because it's seen as a negative thing in the church can cause mental illness. So, okay. So when to initiate help? Can someone give me the time?
11:02.
Oh, okay. So seeking help. So in your congregation, in your job, wherever you're working, seek help if you know that mental illness is definitely a diagnosable thing. If it is evident that it is a mental illness that's going on, please don't try to handle it on your own. Even as clinicians in our office, we all get together and we process things together to try to make sure that we're helping the clients that come in, because there's so many aspects to the brain and to people's history and to their trauma history, the way they were raised, their attachment, the way they attach to other people. There's a lot of things that just come into play with that. So please, if you know that someone does have a mental illness, I encourage churches to be involved, and if the person allows, and will sign a release of information, to work as a team. A lot of communities work as teams with mental health entities. And so to help your person, I encourage, if the person is open and willing, have that release of information signed and collaborate together to help the person, so that we as the church aren't saying one thing to the person, not knowing the full history, and this clinician might be speaking from an area that we don't necessarily attribute to in our faith. So don't shy away from being involved. Another thing is suicidology and homicidal threats. Please, please, please take this very seriously. Very seriously. There are things that in some of the churches that I've attended in the past, where some very horrific things have happened, because not that the leadership didn't believe that something would happen, but they didn't reach out for help, to help in these situations. And there are experiences and things that happen that are too gross, too over the top, that I won't even speak it out loud here because it's just too much. I don't want to traumatize you hearing some of those stories. Seriously, some really bad things happen. Domestic violence. You know, a lot of times we think that we can help the couple in our church where there's domestic violence. And domestic violence is really a scary thing. And I encourage churches and have helped some churches that when there's domestic violence, get the victim and children out. Don't make them stay in their home because the abuser is going to come back to the home. It doesn't matter how many times the police have been there. It doesn't matter how many things they have against them to keep them away. Get them out of the home. But be smart. There's a friend of mine who's in leadership at a church, and they did help mom and 3 kids to get out of her home, and they moved into a home of another parishioner. And actually, the dad, the husband, got angry one night, came to that home and killed all of his family members, but one little girl survived. So it happened in the home of a parishioner. So there are boundaries and things you really need to pay attention to. Again, the foster care and adoption issues. And then when you need help, transference issues, counter-transference issues, that's when you're talking to someone and they're bringing up your junk, your trauma, your stuff, and you can't be objective about what you're hearing because you might be being re-traumatized by their story if you went through the same thing. So please reach out for help. And then any relationship concerns or other interagency incidents. Something's going on in the leadership of the church or relationship stuff with parishioners. It affects the whole church. And those times there really needs to be debriefing and help for the whole congregation as a whole, together as a unit, and then individually where things might have hit a little harder home. So again, those are more areas for you to seek help. All right, I need to be done at 11:15? And it's what time? All right, so if we would have time, we would have done a little exercise where I would ask you to have described a situation that was hard and wanting to know if you sought help or if you didn't and what the outcome was. However, because time is so short and I want to give space for a little more question and answers, we're going to go past this. Okay? As Community Care and Counseling Center, we're with Pastor Anthony's church in Salem, Oregon. I was a private clinician, and the church had always wanted to have a counseling center. So almost 2 years ago, we came together and we created a board of directors, which actually right now is myself, Ladina, and Susan. All of us are ordained at our church, and we're actually foster and adoptive parents. So we tend to have a big focus on that in our practice, but that's not all. We do have people coming in from children from 10 cities, people who have been sex trafficked. We have some really severe cases that we work with. And we know that you have the stuff sitting in your congregations as well. And so one of the things that has always been on my heart has been to be an agent, to be a listening ear and to be present with those who are in the trenches, who are working and who are walking beside people who are traumatized. So one of the things that we are now going to be offering as a center is consultation. We are starting a membership program, and that's there's a sign-up sheet back there if anyone wants to know more information. But basically, if you have a situation and you just want to talk to somebody, get some consulting on a certain matter, in the membership, you will get 2 hours a month for consulting. We also want to start a monthly support group through Teams where people can come on at the same time of the month to just share what you're going through, ask questions, and just be community together and walking through stuff. we will also like to help in vetting in your own community. So we're in Oregon, and you might be across the country. We have ways of trying to find people in your area, unless you're a really tiny, small town of 50 people, and trying to help you find help that would be close to where you're at. And then we also have various trainings for the local church and region. We are willing to come if you've got a situation. We're willing to come do intensives at your church or any kind of training or whatever. In the past year, we have participated with a church or two from the fellowship with some situations that came up. And so after a year of doing that, we've come up with some things that we've learned and some boundaries and things. And I'm going to let Ladina come up real quick and do that.
Yeah, my name is Ladina, and I work at the Counseling Center. I also work for our church. And I just recently graduated with my master's for licensed counseling. Some basic things that I just want to encourage you guys is that in your churches, like, create crisis teams. I think that's really helpful. And again, just get the clinical knowledge as well as the pastoral counseling knowledge, because how I was trained when I was doing pastoral care was I wasn't just the pastoral counseling, but also the clinical training, because again, understanding how the brain works, understanding how we can re-traumatize people if we don't understand those things. So just encouraging that. And Kaylene's really passionate about ways to train and to learn that. And so if you have questions about that, please do not hesitate to ask her. The other thing is just creating that support network. What I found is that because I am not licensed in the state that I was helping clients, it was really challenging to be able to try to help them get the resources they needed in their region. And so I was able to hand them off to some counseling, but again, without having just the connection with the church at the time, it was really challenging to be able to communicate so we could come together as a full circle. And so again, and the other thing I just want to say real quick is just, if you are helping someone and you are finding yourself getting that counter-transference, please seek help with that, because it's real and it will affect you in ways. So.
Yeah. Okay, so quick moment for questions. Anything that I haven't answered that you might want asked. And let me just tell you this too. I'm here till Friday afternoon sometime. So if there's something that you want to come tap me and say, hey, you got a half an hour or whatever to just share with me or ask some questions, please feel free to do that. Okay, go ahead.
I was just going to say, when you have somebody in your family that's had like trauma, and is it best, like for myself, something like this happened a few years back. It's been going on, and I've tried to be a safe space, you know. But to know, I think from today, like, I have a certain amount of guilt for not trying to talk about it. You know what I mean? I think I probably should try. You know, I just haven't gotten to talk to him about it. You know, we see each other all the time and do things together. But like, I've tried to be a safe space. And then, of course, there's been a few times when I've done the wrong thing, and then the person acts out. Totally,
Right.
because
Yeah.
I put on the wrong TV program or something, thinking it's a good Christian program, but something in there.
Yeah.
But the guilt of not talking about it, but yet from what you're saying, I think, like, to bring it up and talk about it may really cause more trauma.
Correct.
So how
Correct.
do you balance that with thinking, well, am I being a good mom, or can I talk about it more, or,
So,
you know, or a good friend?
so in our clinic, often a child will be brought to us first. But by the time that they have their first or second session, we usually end up having the whole family come in. We have 5 clinicians, and so it's not uncommon to have a family member in each room. And then what we do, which we're very different than most places, is then we as clinicians get together, and this is what I got from my client. What did you get? How can we help the family? To us, family is very important. That's one of our main things, is to strengthen families, to heal families. And the more, especially a family member, who brings up spiritual things, sometimes will really shut the person down, because what's happening is whenever we come against a perception or a thought, a belief system, it challenges our original convictions, especially if we were Christians. So to bring scripture to them that they might have already known or whatever actually could cause the person to like back off for a while. So what we do is we then will work with the client, and then when we feel it's ready, then we bring the parent in or the other member that there's conflict with and do sessions together. But I would encourage you, seek help and talk about it with somebody else. You need to talk about it for yourself. And that's sometimes where we have to trust God to take care of our family members. Because I think we all have a family member or two that sometimes we just need to be present and just keep them safe. So, anything else? Anybody else? I really wish I had more time with you. Like I said, I usually do 2.5 hours. So I'm throwing a lot at you. But please feel free to connect with me. My email is on the brochure. There's business cards on the back with my phone number. Please feel free to reach out to me. Anthony actually is in our office also. So it's just really nice, our pastor Anthony. It's just really nice sometimes to go to him, because we do have situations that are downright demonic that come into our place. And so just having that, everyone that works in our center, even though we don't publicize that we're faith-based, everyone is a believer, and we do really rely on the Holy Spirit to get us through each session with our clients. So, if nothing, yeah.
I mean, if we have time. Well, I can have a question. So if there's somebody in the church that needs some help, how do you approach that person without traumatizing that person? And like the gossip starts going around, and then, and then that person's going to feel, or how do you?
Well, first of all, it depends on the relationship you have with the person. If you don't have an intimate, I'm using that word loosely, but if you don't have a relationship that's kind of maybe tried to be built on trust, because at this point, people who are traumatized, they trust nobody. I have therapists who say, oh, this kid's really starting to trust me. I'm thinking, you are deceiving yourself, because anyone who's been traumatized, they do not trust. And so the first thing is just be present and be safe. Show things of safety. And then if there's someone who is part of a crisis team or part of the leadership who might have a relationship where they can, go to the person and say, hey, or, like a small group leader or somebody in position. Unless you're a close friend and they view you as a close friend, then I would find somebody.
Sorry, just to get in on that, like the ideal situation is people asking for help.
Yes.
But most times people won't ask for help.
Right. But that's why they come into the church in the first place.
So you I think that's also sometimes should be a natural process where there's discipleship.
Yes.
And you're walking alongside that person, and they will get to the point where they will say, listen, obviously I need some help.
Yeah.
But if they don't, then you kind of have to be there to say,
Yeah.
don't you think maybe?
If I had more time, I would go into even defining Christianity, because there's different levels. People will say that they're a Christian just because we were a Christian nation, although that's kind of changing. So before, we could go to someone else as a Christian brother or sister, but until we even understand their definition of Christian and where they're at in their relationship. So people need to feel safe. I'm going to end with this because we've got to go. People first need to feel safe. And until they feel safe, they cannot learn to trust. And they will not love reciprocally until there's trust. And then once they can love, then they can obey. So when I see parents come in and they say, my kid just will not obey me, then my thing is, that's fine where they're not trusting you. Where's there a breakdown in the trust? So thank you. I will be around. Thank you so much.
Thank you.